The silence from Trump was deafening. A simple question about Canada, just one question, and the former president erupted. Not because the topic was irrelevant, but because it hit a nerve so deep even he couldn't hide the sting. Behind the fury, behind the deflections and sudden focus shifts, lies a story the U.S. media is barely touching, a geopolitical rupture decades in the making. Canada, once the closest ally and economic partner of the United States, has now taken a bold, coordinated step to distance itself. And it's not doing it alone. This is not just a trade dispute. It's not about a tax. What we're witnessing is the unraveling of an entire strategic alliance that once defined the North American order. And Trump, in his typical style, isn't just failing to stop it. He's accelerating it. So what exactly happened? And why has this moment become the turning point in the U.S.-Canada relationship? It all started with a 3% digital services tax. That's it. 3%. Canada had been debating it for years. And this June, it finally became law. Aimed squarely at U.S. tech giants, Google, Apple, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, the tax was a direct response to years of fiscal abuse, where corporations that dominate Canadian digital markets paid next to nothing in taxes. Ottawa decided enough was enough. And unlike Trump's bluffs about tariffs that might come next month, Canada's tax wasn't a threat. It was enforcement. Immediate. Legal. Binding. Trump responded the only way he knows how, with rage and threats. On Truth Social, he announced the abrupt termination of all trade negotiations with Canada. He called the tax outrageous, labeled Canada a difficult country, and promised retaliatory tariffs within 7 days. Not just any tariffs. Trump floated a figure so absurd it was almost comedic, up to 400% on Canadian goods. But Canada didn't flinch. Mark Carney, Canada's new prime minister, didn't just brush off the threats. He launched a counteroffensive. 3 rapid moves, executed within days, shifted the power dynamic entirely. First, the tax wasn't paused. It wasn't up for negotiation. It was implemented. No delays, no diplomatic back channels. A line had been drawn. Second, Canada internationalized the issue. Carney flew to Europe and secured trade coordination agreements with the EU, ones that explicitly seek to bypass U.S. dependency. Supply chains will be diversified. U.S. goods will be substituted with European alternatives. And for the first time, Canada and Europe jointly stated, "We are the canary in the coal mine. What's happening to us could happen to you." This wasn't just a trade stance. It was a warning to the rest of the world about U.S. economic bullying. Third, Carney set a clock, a countdown. If the U.S. refuses to return to the negotiating table by July, Canada will unleash its own retaliatory tariffs. Not threats, not tweets, action. And that's when everything changed. Trump, expecting submission, got resistance. And not just from Canada. The United Kingdom, Australia, and the entire European Union have now aligned with Ottawa's position. The digital tax model, once seen as a fringe ideal, is becoming international standard. For the first time in modern history, the United States is no longer the axis of Western economic policy. It's the outlier. Don't leave just yet. Stay with us until the end, because what you're about to hear could change the way you understand global power. We'll break it all down so you can stay ahead of the curve. This is QWIC News, where we explain everything to boost your critical understanding of today's events. The backlash wasn't limited to tariffs or taxes. The real story is much darker and far more personal. In early June, a Canadian citizen named Johnny Noviello died in a U.S. ICE detention center. He had landed in Florida, healthy and calm. Hours later, he was dead. No explanation, no medical reports, no accountability. The Canadian government is now demanding answers. And this is no longer just about policy. It's about human lives and diplomatic trust. As Trump escalates, Canada distances. But it doesn't retreat. The alliance with Europe is solidifying, not just through trade, but through shared values. The new digital tax is just one piece of a larger puzzle, one that includes data privacy, human rights, environmental standards, and now, protection against authoritarian overreach. Trump has accused Canada of harboring terrorist cells, of letting gangs flood over the border, of hiding weapons in suburban neighborhoods. No evidence, no intelligence briefings, just statements, irresponsible ones, that endanger bilateral trust and investor confidence. And yet, what should scare Washington the most isn't the tax. It's the shift. Canada no longer needs the U.S. as it once did. And that's the greatest strategic loss America could face. Let's talk numbers. Over $2 billion in goods cross the U.S. Canada border every single day. Their economies are tightly intertwined, from energy grids to agricultural exports, from semiconductors to clean tech. But now, for the first time, Canada is seeking full economic decoupling in specific sectors. Food supply, energy transition, digital infrastructure, all are being redirected toward European, British, and even Indo-Pacific partners. Trump's miscalculation is brutal. He thought Canada would break. Instead, they're building a coalition. Even the UK's Rishi Sunak and Australia's Albanese have expressed solidarity with Ottawa's move. And the EU. It just signed a framework to replicate the same digital tax across all member states. The United States, once the moral compass and strategic backbone of the West, is being outflanked. This brings us to the question Trump doesn't want to answer. Who really needs whom? Trump insists America needs no one, that it's self-reliant. But if that were true, why does a 3% tax from a small partner like Canada cause such an explosive reaction? Why are investors pulling back? Why is there panic in the tech sector? Because the truth is, the U.S. economy is vulnerable, particularly under a Trump-led regime that prioritizes dominance over diplomacy. And what about USMCA, formerly NAFTA? Trump is now threatening to dismantle it altogether. He claims it benefits only Mexico and Canada. But data shows that U.S. agriculture, automotives, and digital services depend deeply on this trilateral trade pact. If it collapses, it's not just Ottawa or Mexico that suffers. It's rural U.S. farmers, Midwest manufacturers, and millions of American jobs. And if that weren't enough, Trump continues to frame Canada as the aggressor. He says their dairy tariffs are insulting. But those 400% figures he throws around, they're part of a supply management system Canada has used for decades to protect local producers, a model that actually works, and one some Mexican analysts now argue could benefit their own farmers too. Trump's hypocrisy is glaring. He praises tariffs as his favorite economic weapon until they're used against him. He praises sovereignty until other nations assert theirs. He praises self-sufficiency until it's not American. And the world is watching. Foreign investment in the U.S. is declining. Confidence in Trump's economic vision is fading. Allies are no longer just frustrated. They're exiting the partnership, quietly, strategically, and permanently. The death of Johnny Noviello, the digital tax war, the collapse of trust, all of this is part of a larger pattern. The United States is isolating itself. Not because it must, but because it chooses to. Or rather, because Trump chooses to. What comes next? Canada's July deadline is fast approaching. If Trump doesn't return to the negotiating table, the trade war will escalate. But this time, the U.S. stands alone. And in global economics, isolation isn't strength, it's suicide. So let's ask what really matters here. What happens when the last of your friends turns away? What happens when Europe, Canada, the UK, Australia, even Mexico decide that the costs of American partnership now outweigh the benefits? And what happens when your enemies aren't even needed anymore, because your allies have left you behind? If this kind of content resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, share, and support independent analysis. We'll keep breaking down what really matters, because this isn't just news, it's your future.